for some of you, it could be your first experience as a Madrichot and you're really not even sure what you're going to get yourself into. So part of what tonight is about is preparing you for what are some of the situations that you might be facing this year and how to, how to deal with them as they come up. So that's another really important purpose of tonight. I would also like to introduce Leah Cantor. Leah, do you want to tell us about yourself?
Hi, nice to meet you all on Zoom. I work in Machon Dvir, which is an English-speaking clinic in Yerushalayim, where we have a staff of psychiatrists, social workers, psychologists, and we treat various different things, ranging from really high risk, things like personality disorder, self-injury, as well as depression, anxiety, many issues that are going to come up in this journey that you're all on in helping the girls. We work as a team, so we're a team of about seven clinicians, and we work together to maximize the treatment. We work with the Amudim a lot as well.
Yeah, so this is a collaborative effort between Amudim and Machon Dvir, which is a clinic. Amudim does not provide any therapy, in contrast to Machon Dvir, which actually provides therapy. Amudim, we send people out. We'll show them where the services that are matim for them go, and Machon Dvir is a clinic that provides therapy. Okay, so let's start by let's put it right on the table. This year is not like any other year. So for a lot of seminary girls this year, they're going to have to be in quarantine for 2 weeks. If you just arrived from America, you're going to have to be in quarantine for 2 weeks, which is not an unchallenging situation. Okay, so the year is different than any other year right off the bat. Plus, as you know, the students and yourselves are coming off of a whole 6 months of anxiety, uncertainty. A lot of people who were stuck at home with family members who, they could have unhealthy relationships with, whether that's parents or siblings. A lot of the outlets that people used to use, like, okay, even though my family drives me crazy, then I'll hang out with my friends. It's fine, I'll get out, I'll take a breather. If your take a breather option has gone out the window, that's not an option for you because you're really stuck at home. So that's obviously going to be a challenge that you might have faced or are facing, depending on what country you're in at this moment, and definitely your students. So super important to realize that we are starting the year at a higher level of anxiety than in previous years, with whatever issues have been compounded over the past couple months building up inside of yourself and inside of your students, everything surrounding and related to Corona. So let's put that out there. So how are we going to deal with that? So the first thing we have to remember is that we have to accept the fact that there's going to be a certain amount of uncertainty and anxiety, and that's okay. You're not broken, there's nothing wrong with you. We kind of have to accept the fact that we're all going to be a little bit more on high alert, both you and the students, and forgive ourselves for our alertness, and forgive them for being a little bit more high strung than usual. But also specifically when it comes to Corona, and in the next class, Machon Dvir is going to talk about what are mental health warning signs, but I'm just going to point out that specifically when it comes to Corona, is that if you have a student, or if you see in yourself a level of anxiety that is beyond what the rest of the girls are going through, that person might be struggling a little bit more than everyone else, right? There's going to be a certain amount of anxiety. If the girl is falling apart, then she might need more than your average level of support. If you find yourself in that situation where you're just worried about everything and you don't want to talk to anyone, you don't want to touch anything, you don't want to go anywhere because your surroundings are creating that much anxiety, then that's also something that you want to just accept about yourself, and let me see if I can get some support about that, so I'm not walking around the whole year in a state of high alert. Okay, so that's what's new for this year, is that we're all going to be a little bit more high strung than usual. And that said, let's talk about some of the things that are typical to the Madrichot job, typical to what the students are going through, what you might be seeing in your students, and typically how to respond for them. And just like keep in mind that everything's going to be like a little bit more high strung. So I turn over the mic to Sarah Malka, who is going to begin talking to you about the Madrichot job.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. So sort of very similar to what Fagi was saying, there are typical and normal issues that you guys would probably see in students. Again, a lot of those issues might be intensified now because of Corona, but some of the typical issues are, students' families' financial struggles, attention issues that they might be having, like a hard time focusing, low self-esteem, issues with body image, or uncertainty with Corona in general, complicated family dynamics, again, like the anxiety of being stuck at home or in school or in a dorm, and not getting the full seminary experience that they hoped for years and years, anxiety, and just also issues and concerns and thoughts about relationships, whether it's relationships with friends, possibly, some of the students will be starting shidduchim or thinking about shidduchim. So again, these are all like basically normal issues that will most likely come up. And a lot of these experiences, again, will be intensified because of Corona. But it should really be stressed that these are normal, these are common, and to sort of get out of the realm of normalcy and to be more of a concern, we just sort of have to be mindful of the frequency and intensity of these issues, so very, very good and positive to know that these things are normal, but it's also important for us to look at, how often is this student talking about this or thinking about this? How debilitated are they? Are they just like sitting in their room, like, completely engrossed in a topic, like nonstop, or are they like, expressing normal anxiety, then able to move on? So it's very important to sort of focus on that frequency and intensity to differentiate between normal issues and maybe things that are, going out of normalcy. And in that case, obviously, we would have to get them some more help. Because this year specifically is a little bit more stressful than other years, we're going to talk about a topic that is very, very important this year, but it's always important, especially in a helping job, a job where you're helping or supporting other people. That topic is self-care. So most of us have probably heard of that term. It basically means, taking care of yourself, simply. But specifically this year, it's very crucial. In order to be there for someone else and to have the energy, to have sort of the mindset and the calmness to be there for someone else, we have to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves, and that we're grounded and we're healthy. So it's something that everyone should really keep in mind this year, even on a day-to-day basis, especially if you're feeling like extra stressed or extra anxious, to sort of think about what does it for you? Like, what's helpful for you in terms of self-care? For some people, it could be having people to check into, speaking to friends. For other people, it could be making sure that you're eating well, you're sleeping well, you're getting a full night's sleep, you're not like staying up until 4 a.m. speaking to students. You're taking walks or doing really anything that you find enjoyable. Some people, they like, breathing skills, and they like grounding and guided imagery. And again, there are so many apps and videos where you can access that stuff. So the important part really of self-care is to just be familiar with yourself, and to sort of think about what does it for you, like what makes you feel calm, what makes you feel better, what sort of gives you, that break that you might need. A lot of people have hobbies, like, for example, journaling or art, painting, writing, reading. And, a lot of people say like, yeah, it's just a hobby. Like, it's not really important. But it's, in terms of hobbies like that can be a form of self-care. And if that is your self-care, then it's very important to prioritize that hobby, especially especially now. So there are different types of self-care, very briefly, just so we get like sort of an understanding of the different categories that can be touched on. There's physical self-care, emotional self-care, social and spiritual self-care. And this is like super simple. There are a lot of other options. But again, like physical, we spoke about, it's like sleep, exercise, you know, really taking care of your physical body. Emotional self-care could be, like Fagi mentioned, actually, like being forgiving to yourself, you know, not being so harsh on yourself. If maybe you're not having the best day and you're not super composed just because of, you know, all the extra stressors that are happening. Another type of emotional self-care would be compassionate to yourself, which is similar, stress management. A social type of self-care would be, you know, having friends to speak to, being able to ask for help if you need that. You know, that's also really being responsible and taking care of yourself. And then in terms of spiritual, it could be listening to a shir, a davening. For some people have a gratitude journal, which is basically like, you know, a notebook or a book where they write down a few things that they're thankful for. And, you know, in terms of like a gratitude journal, there are both Jewish sources and research studies that speak about the benefits of a gratitude journal, you know, on our physical and our emotional bodies and well-being. So those are some examples of self-care. And I just, you know, I really want to stress it. Being in any type of helping profession, it is so important for you yourself to be healthy and to feel grounded and to feel calm. And without that, you know, you won't be so much of a help to others. So that's super important. Now we're gonna sort of segue into speaking about communication with students. Like, how do we, you know, okay, we're taking care of ourselves and we're making sure that that's a priority, but how do we actually like communicate and interact with students in a way that's healthy, and in a way that's going to be most beneficial to them. So I want everyone to imagine that they're super common, you're approaching your friend with like some sort of issue that you have. And like, it could be just an everyday issue, whether it's a fight you had with your mother or a disagreement maybe that you had with a boss, an annoying parking ticket, like any type of like normal everyday situation, but something that, you know, has that frustration. So imagine that you're going to your friend, you're unburdening yourself, you're saying like, oh my gosh, it's so annoying, like this thing happened, and now you're waiting for their reaction, right? And you're sort of waiting for helpful reaction. And, you know, if you're able to put yourself in those shoes, you're going to them wanting that support. I'm gonna read some, this is from actually a parenting book, but I'm gonna read some reactions or responses that people might tell you. You know, if you're going to this friend, your friend might say these responses. They're very, very common responses. As I read them, I want you to sort of tune into your immediate gut feeling. Like, what would your reaction be if your friend answered your whole frustrating situation in this way? Again, these are very common, so I'm just gonna start reading them. The first response that your friend might say: there's no reason to be so upset. You know, it's foolish to feel that way. You're probably just tired and blowing the whole thing out of proportion. And then this is something that I don't know about you guys, but I hear this a lot. Like, come on, just smile. So this response is like a complete denial of your feelings. You know, you're not going there to like, for them to like examine the situation. You're going there because you want support and validation. So that's the first response, which if I heard that response, I would not feel better. I would probably feel even worse. Another response that people often say: things don't always turn out the way that we want. In this world, nothing's perfect. And then, you know, they might go on to like some sort of betachon lesson, like, you know, Hashem does things for a reason, or like, just have betachon, like this must be for your best. Again, it's nice in theory. Yes, Hashem does things for the best, but to hear this as a response when you're going to someone for help, also not so helpful. Another response: didn't you realize he'd be angry if you didn't get to it immediately? Has this ever happened before? Why didn't you follow him when he left the room and try to explain again? So this is sort of like a detective perspective, you know, like asking like a lot of questions, trying to get to the bottom of the story. Again, like when someone's frustrated about something, they don't necessarily want to explain every detail. You know, they're sort of looking for that validation. So this also I wouldn't find so helpful. So now I'm going to read the last two responses, which I want to focus on more. So this one is, oh, you poor thing, that's terrible. I feel so sorry for you, I could just cry. So this response is also, you know, in variations, very common. We're gonna call it the sympathetic response. You know, a person sort of trying to relate with you and sort of trying to, you know, be there for you. But when I hear this, it sounds like a little degrading, you know, like, oh, you poor thing. It sounds more like they're feeling bad for you. They're not actually like trying to experience it with you. And the last response, which is the response that we're going to strive for, especially in our relationships with the girls, is an empathetic response. It says, boy, that sounds like a rough experience. To be subjected to an attack like that in front of other people, especially after having been under so much pressure, must have been pretty hard to take. So that last response, I mean, I think that most of you would agree that that last response is the response that we would want to hear. It's the most helpful response, and it sort of makes you feel supported. It makes you feel like someone's trying to connect to you. They're trying to understand your situation, to put themselves in your shoes. So that, again, is called an empathetic response. And now we're going to sort of get an understanding of what an empathetic response looks like and what the difference is between empathy and sympathy, which is the response that we read previously. I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to watch a video. So just give me a minute. Let's see if we can do this. Okay. Do you guys see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay, here we go.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. Yeah. And we do it all the time, because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now. I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
Okay. So I think that puts it really clearly. the difference between empathy and sympathy. Again, like I love that sort of imagery of, I don't know exactly what who that characters actually were, but like what animal they were. But anyways, when the character came down into the hole and sort of tried to experience that situation with the other character, that's like a really good view of what empathy is. You know, even if you're not physically coming down, but you're sort of trying to put yourself in their shoes. You're trying to feel with them and seeing the world through their lenses, trying to understand their experiences. Sympathy, you know, we could all imagine when we come to someone with an issue or a difficulty that we're experiencing, and we didn't get the reaction that we wanted, and we thought like, that's the last time I'm sharing something with you, or like the last time I'm telling you something. We could all imagine like a facial expression that says like, oh, I feel bad for you, or like, oh, you poor thing, you know, like we read in the book, or even like the head tilt, like, oh, like those are really unhelpful responses, and they sort of make us feel like a charity case. So that's what we're trying to stay away from. So now, just in practicality, some empathetic responses. These are some examples that you could potentially say. And again, like there are an endless amount of examples, but just to get an idea. An example of an empathetic response, like, wow, you must have felt so sad when that happened to you, or that must be so hard. Sounds like it was so embarrassing. You sound scared, right? So again, all of these responses are sort of trying to understand their situation and trying to imagine what they're going through. So some practical tips of how to actually communicate empathy. The first tip is listening with full attention. You know, you wanna be focused, and you wanna show them that you're listening and that you're interested. And if it's not a good time for you, if you're busy or you're in the middle of something or whatever, it's best to communicate that instead of trying to like, you know, split your attention and do two things at once. You could say something like, right now is not a good time. I'm in the middle of something, but I really want to, you know, give you the attention. I really want to focus on what you're saying. So can you come back in 10 minutes? So listening with full attention. Another practical tip is, just like we said in a lot of these empathetic examples, the response is acknowledge the feelings that they're expressing and give it a name. It could be sad, afraid, hurt, distressed. Again, there are like an endless amount of feeling descriptions that you could use, but it's just sort of trying to relate to the feeling that they're experiencing. Something that a lot of people do when someone comes to them with a problem or frustration is trying to solve it. You know, like, okay, let's brainstorm together, like what could we do? So sometimes this is needed, and sometimes a student will approach you asking specifically to brainstorm with them. But the first reaction that you should have should always be an empathetic response. You know, the brainstorming can come later, but they're really looking for like connection and for support, and that comes through an empathetic response. And the last tip is, don't get stuck on the words. You know, sometimes like we learn a new skill and like we're very excited to practice it, and we sound like a complete robot because we're trying to think of the exact words to say. So even if you're at a loss of words and you don't know what to say, you know, like in the video, I think they said something similar in the video, you can sort of express that, like, you know, I'm not sure what to say right now, or I don't have the right words, but I can imagine this must have been really difficult for you. So what would you say to a student using like all of these skills that we discussed? What would you say to a student who you know, approaches you with a problem and they look like they're about to unburden themselves, and then like they sort of become more reserved and they say like, you'll never understand anyways. You never experienced this, you know, you never experienced this, you'll never understand, like, never mind, I don't want to speak to you. So this is something that I think is common for people to say and for people to hear. And I think our answer should be based on, again, like all of these types of skills, but also it should be based on the knowledge that we all have a tendency to be like the expert and to have the right answers. You know, we want to like be able to say like, yeah, actually I did experience this. But again, that's not always true. And even if it is true, it's not necessarily what the student might be looking for. Again, the goal is to show them that you're there for them, that you could be like a source of comfort, a support for them, and also to sort of be brave enough to agree with them, like, and to be vulnerable and say, like, you're right, I never experienced this. So again, like a response based on like all of that could be, you know, I may not have experienced this, or like, you're right, I didn't experience this, but if you let me, I can try and understand, you know, or I'm here to listen if you feel ready, to share. So again, using all of those skills, we're going to sort of speak about a different topic that is related. And I want you to keep in mind everything that we spoke about up until now while we speak about this topic. So let's say a student comes over to you and she sort of says, she says, you know, I have to tell you something, but I don't know how to say it. And this is the first time I'm telling anyone. I've never told anyone before. So this is called a first disclosure. It's basically them coming and telling you something really sensitive that potentially they never shared with anyone before, or possibly they did share with it before. And we're going to talk about how you can respond to that in a positive way. So some examples of something that they could be disclosing, which again, it could be like any type of sensitive occurrence to them, something that they experience that's sensitive to them. It could really be anything. But some examples could be they're about to tell you that they have a mental health issue, that they are experiencing depression or anxiety, that something traumatic happened to them, that they were abused, that their parents are getting divorced or got divorced, that their father, let's say, just lost his job, or that maybe their parents are in debt. Again, it's the first time that they're sharing any type of sensitive information with you that they have never shared with anyone before. So what's sort of the protocol that we should keep in mind when this happens? I think, again, like very much related to the empathy aspect, is trying to put yourself in their shoes, and imagine how difficult it must have been for them to come and tell you this. You know, it must mean that they trust you. It must mean that they really need the help or the support or the connection. And it also means that they're putting themselves in a really vulnerable place by sharing. And your reaction is so important, because it might determine whether or not they will tell someone else in the future who could potentially help them. You know, if they feel supported by you and they feel like, wow, I'm so happy I told her, then they might in the future be more open to telling other people who could help them. So just some tips on some ways to respond. You should be super careful about your facial expressions. You know, like, don't act with shock or with panic when you hear whatever they just told you. I've heard from so many people, like, you know, I didn't feel comfortable with that therapist or with that teacher or with that role model, because, you know, I told them something and I just felt like they were judging me. Like, I could see it in their eyes, or I could see it in their facial expression that they were like really afraid. So again, not so easy to do, but try to be mindful of your facial expressions. Another thing is to sort of give off a calm energy, even if you're not really feeling it inside, but try to give off that impression that you're calm, because, you know, panic breeds more panic. If for example, you're holding a baby and you're really anxious, like, the baby picks up on that, and the baby usually becomes more anxious or more panicked because of your panic. So again, trying to be calm is very important. Validation and empathy is super important. And at the same time, you don't want to over validate. Like, you don't want to, like, you know, say something like, oh my gosh, that must be so hard for you. I can't even imagine. Like, wow, I can't stop thinking about it. I keep thinking about how hard it is. It must have been so difficult for you to experience that. And, like, you know, to keep on dragging it on and on and on, it can sometimes feel a bit insincere, and actually not validating if you over validate. And you should also feel honored. You know, it was a very important disclosure that they might not have shared with anyone else. And it's a real privilege to be brought into someone else's world and to be brought into their experiences, and to feel that they trusted you in that way. Again, similar to the facial expression, like, don't say like, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. Like, again, that can be interpreted as like disbelief, as not believing them. And that may have been one of the reasons that they didn't share previously, because they were scared that they wouldn't be believed. You can reinforce confidentiality, like say, you know, this will be between me and you, you know, it can be private. don't ask so many questions or, you know, try to get so many details. You could leave that for a professional setting, especially if you're not equipped or you don't feel equipped to deal with whatever issue they're sharing. And sort of the last tip that I would have is to know yourself and know your own stuff. Like if you had a similar experience to what they're sharing, it's probably not the best idea to reflect on your experience and assume that they experienced it the same way, because they probably didn't. So come listen with fresh eyes. So now Figi is going to take over.
Okay, so thank you so much, Sarah. I would like to, you know, kind of piggyback on that. I'm going to assume that if you're a Madrichot, at some point you had a Madrichot. So this might sound familiar from when you had a Madrichot, which is that the friendship / authority balance between the Madrichot and the students it's hard to navigate. Okay, it's hard to navigate. If you're a student, you'll oftentimes relate to the Madrichot both as a friend, but also sort of like a mentor, you know, someone to look up to, someone to confide in a certain like respectful way, but you're also kind of friends. It's like a very unique relationship in that way. And depending on your school is going to be the responsibilities that come with that. You might be responsible for curfew. You might be responsible for enforcing rules like, I don't know what, phones get turned off at, each school has their own rule. Phones get turned off, or no computer time, or the lights go out, or whatever the particular rule is for your school. Many times it's going to be left to the Madrichot to enforce that. So you kind of get in this situation where you had a girl who you've like been talking to, and she's telling you what's going on in her life, and she like so appreciative of this relationship with you, and then you're like, oh, you broke curfew. Okay, so it can get uncomfortable, and it's something that needs to be balanced. So one thing to be mindful of is boundaries. So number one, I do think it's a good rule for the Madrichot's room to be off limits. Okay, you don't want girls like piling into your room all the time. Make sure you guys have the personal space. If like the Madrichot's room should be off limits, you shouldn't have girls hanging out in your room all the time. Make sure you get your personal space. It's bad enough you have to live in a dorm, but they at least kind of make it like, this is my area, this is my personal space. That's number one. And also, you know, depending on the rules of your school, you should also be careful about respecting their personal space, right? Be very aware of everybody's need for personal space, okay? So that's number one, your own need and their need for personal space. That's number one. Number two is there is a desire to be helpful. There's a natural desire to be needed. If somebody's confiding in you, you're gonna feel good about that. You're gonna feel like they're trained to me, they trust me. I've kind of gone up a status in the world, as opposed to just being a person. Now I'm someone that people look up to and they want my advice. And while that natural feeling of feeling good when they turn to you is natural and it's a good thing, if you start to feel like you need it and you need that approval, then that can lead to unhealthy boundaries in the relationship. Because again, if I need their approval, it's going to be very difficult for me to say no when I need to say no. And especially when it comes to enforcing rules. So you want to be kind to yourself, save yourself a lot of trouble by, as much as you care and you're there for them, to remember your position as a Madrichot is going to include certain responsibilities, and to be mindful of that, so to speak, keep a certain amount of distance. This is not going to become your best friend, because the nature of your position is one of a certain amount of authority. So like, for example, she comes to you and you have whatever student this is, she comes to you, I really need to talk to you. Oh my gosh, I just got off the phone with my mother. I have to talk to her right now. But you right now are supposed to be packing up the food for a tiyul, or you right now are supposed to be taking attendance, or you're supposed to be doing curfew, or you're talking to another girl, because there's always going to be that one girl who wants more of you and more of you and more of you. But you as Madrichot are not supposed to be like the personal confidant of one girl. You're supposed to be there as a support for all of them. So a good way to respond to that is like, oh my gosh, I really want to hear give me 10 minutes and you'll have my full attention. Or I have a meeting with the Ambias soon. At 11 o'clock, I'll be able to talk to you for 10 minutes, right? You're allowed to put time on that. And even though sometimes you feel like the more I give her, the more generous I'm being, at the same time is that you have to realize that you're a human being. And if you give too much, you'll end up in situations that are going to be a little sticky. So if you give too much attention to one student, you're going to get into a sticky situation. If you lose your boundaries with this student, then when you need to enforce rules, you're also going to be in a sticky situation. And it's okay to, meaning it's not a contradiction to showing that you care. You can say, I care about you, right? Like she says, can you like, just don't tell them I was late, or don't tell them I told you that I was in so-and-so place, right? So you can say something, I care about you, but I'm not willing to call in sick when you've been baking curfew, right? I'm not willing to lie for you. I'm not gonna cover your trail for you. That's a hard thing to do, okay? I'm putting it out right there. It's a hard thing to do when your students want you to cover for them, okay? But you don't want to get yourself into a situation where you're taking responsibility for their bad decisions, right? If there's one thing if they want to get in trouble, but if they want to get in trouble and have you cover their case, stay far away from that, because then you're taking responsibility for their bad decisions. And also many times the school is going to they're going to tell you what's going on with so-and-so. Do you know anything that's going on? And you're going to be in this super uncomfortable position where you want to be doing your job well, you care about the person, you want to keep them safe, and at the same time they're like, don't tell anyone, cover for me. And you feel this need to prove how much you care about them by breaking those rules. So keep that in your mind right now. Very important to keep your boundaries. You can show that you care, you can develop these friendships, but not make promises of, I'm gonna cover for you, don't worry, I won't tell anyone, because part of your job is oftentimes going to have to be passing on necessary information. Now, I want you to know this is also something to discuss with your principal, because different schools have different policies. Like some schools might say, I just want the student to talk to someone. If it's talking to you, that's fine. You don't have to pass that information on for me. While some schools do not have that policy, and they'll say, if there's anything that's going on in the dorm that I need to know about, you need to tell me. Okay, so it's very important that you get clear now, what is your school policy in terms of passing on information? What is information that you do need to pass on, and what is information that the school does not need you to pass on? That being said, Sarah brought up the question of first disclosures, which means somebody tells you they're in a mental health crisis, or let's say they experienced a trauma, they were abused. So now they're turning to you. Now, you are a Madrichot. You are not a therapist. You are not a any sort of legal authority. So to take responsibility for this is something that would be unsafe for you to do. So what would you want to do? You would want to pass that on to someone who could help. But if this person confided in you and they don't want you to tell anyone, so then you're going to be talking to them about the necessity to talk to someone else. So let's say someone says they're abused, right? So you want to go through all of Sarah's empathy tools and just be there with them. And then if the conversation continues and now it's time for it, or kind of feel it out, to talk to them about how they can stay safe, you'll say, you know what, maybe it's a good idea for you to talk to someone about what you went through, so that you could, you can really get guidance on how to deal with it and all the emotional fallout of it. Now, likelihood is they'll probably say no. Because oftentimes if it's their first disclosure, then they're not ready to hear that yet. Oftentimes they'll say no. Sometimes they'll say, oh no, I've tried therapy before, it's not for me. Okay, that's their prerogative. You don't need to push them. However, you do need to be very careful about not taking on the role of the therapist, right? Because what happens is you're the Madrichot. They've told you something they haven't told anyone in the world, okay? And now she comes back to you the next night. I keep having nightmares about what I went through, and you're the only one who knows, and I just don't know what to do with myself, right? And this is way beyond your pay grade, okay? You are not going to know how to be able to guide her through her traumatic symptoms, right? But if she's saying, well, I'm not gonna talk to anyone else, I have to talk to you, you might feel like I need to therefore be the support for her because she's not going to get it anywhere else. And that's not true. That would be a feature of codependency where like, I don't want to push her away because if I don't talk to her, she's not going to talk to anyone else, right? As opposed to realizing that if I take the place of her therapist, she's never going to go to therapy. She's never going to feel the need to get real help because I'm serving as a close second, or I'm serving as a crutch for her, that she can get everything off her chest without having to worry about it and without having to, you know, having to find a therapist or talk to someone responsible. She can just use you as her sounding board. Okay, so you have to be very careful not to let her suck you into that. And how do you do that? The more she brings it up, the more you repeat, wow, you're going through so much. It sounds like it's so hard for you and I want to be here as a support, but I really feel like this is way more than I know really how to guide you through. It's really time to speak to a professional or to call a case manager at Amudim. They can tell you, they can guide you. It'll be confidential. You don't have to tell anyone. And they can guide you on how to respond to what you're going through, but it can't be me. Even if you have to repeat that every night, meaning I'm supporting you as a madrichot. I'm supporting you as a friend. I can support you in that realm, but I can't support I can't support you more than that, and don't let them drag you back into it because well, I'm not ready to go to therapy yet. And that would, if it goes on for a while, it'd be a good time for you to get advice on how to respond to this person in a way that doesn't enable them to keep doing what they're doing. You should also be very careful about wanting to be the savior, about wanting to, you know, be the superhero who rescues them. They've never told anyone, and now I can be the one to help them. You should be very wary of that. Now, can you hear them? Can you hear the kids?
It's very low. At least for me, it's not a distraction.
Okay, fine, great. It's like something that if you're not careful about it, then it's something that can sneak up on you, like a desire to save this girl and to be her rescuer. I had a situation in which we had a situation where there was a girl who was going through something with her family. And so she started talking to it. It happened to be a teacher. It wasn't a Madrichot. She started talking to a teacher about it. And the teacher had her over at her house all the time. And sometimes she slept at the teacher's house. And she talked to the teacher all the time. And she wasn't ready to go to therapy, but she, you know, her teacher was a real emotional support. But as is natural for another person, sometimes they'll feel like, okay, this is too much, right? I have a family I need to take care of. I have my own responsibilities in life. And this girl is taking so much of my emotional space that she would she called the student and she said, you know what? I really feel like this is too much for me. We need to take a break. You need to, maybe not come over so much. And for the student, this was its own trauma. This was like, I relied on you and you were supposed to be there for me and you ditched me like everyone else, okay? And that's really hard for the teacher to hear and it's really hard for the student to go through. So that's the flip side for being the savior, is that it's very difficult to keep up being the superhero all the time. And even if you feel like you can do it, eventually it's gonna burn you out and your own life and your own, whatever you're going through in your own life will take priority over this person and that person will feel abandoned. If you put up boundaries and you say, I can be like, and you decide for yourself, I can be here for her in this capacity. I can give to this girl 10 minutes a night, or I can give to her an hour a week, or one Shabbos a year, one Shabbos every 6 months, we go away together, whatever a particular thing is. But if you let it become something that's way too all-encompassing for you, eventually you burn a person. So really protect yourself and the student from getting into that place where you are taking the place of the therapist and taking responsibility for her life. You can't work harder than her. If she's going through something, but she's not willing to get herself help, then you can't become that help to compensate for that. If she's not working to get herself out of trouble, then you don't need to cover her tracks. If she's not working to get herself help, then you don't need to try to compensate for that by like being her therapist for her. Let her take responsibility for her own life to get the help that's out there for her, and not to rely and not to make you feel like you need to take responsibility for her life. Well, because I trusted you, I told you, now it's your problem. Okay. Was there any questions that anyone had about any of the things that we discussed? I open the floor to you if there are situations that have come up in your, either as a student or as a madricha, or any other questions that came up. We can address a lot of the questions to Leah, who is the therapist at Machon Dvir. If anyone has any general questions or even questions about things that weren't necessarily covered tonight, it might be the answer is it'll be covered in the next class, or it could be that something that we just didn't discuss that could be discussed right now. Any questions? Give you a second to think.
I have a question.
Sure.
If a girl shares a personal story with me, something important, for example, she feels like she's becoming or started signs of anorexia, for example, something like urgent like that. She tells me like don't tell anyone, I won't talk to you, like something like I won't trust you, I'm gonna leave the seminary, for example, like something like bad, like she's like challenging me in a way and like blackmailing, but because she's just so scared for herself. Like of course I'll say like something about this is important information that I have to tell, but how do I not like let her down during
Wow.
that like sensitive spot?
Really good question. I'm really glad you asked that question. I think that you're going to meet those kind of situations often in seminaries. The challenge and also very unique role that a madricha takes is that the girls feel kind of safer with you than they feel with some of the other authority in the seminary, right? So it's easier for them to start opening this up with you than to open it up with, you know, a teacher or a rabbi who might kick them out or tell them, you know, that they're a problem, or, you know, how come you didn't tell us before? Or, you know, even if they do get the appropriate empathic response, it's very, very scary. It's very scary to tell other authority. So
Right.
this definitely will come up. I think that both Sarah and Fagi did address the issue of, you know, feeling responsible for somebody else's emotion, somebody else's secret. So it's definitely going to hit you in a difficult place. I think a message that should be given to the girls from the get-go is that, you know, I'm going to be a safe space for you. I'm not going to share everything that you tell me with the staff, but when it comes to something, you know, that is dangerous, that isn't good for you to keep secret, I will have to report. How about we do it together? Letting them know that you work with the seminary as a team is something that's really important for them to know. And again, this needs to be done in a, you know, an astute manner, because you do want them to feel like they can talk to you about things and not that everything you say is going to go straight, you know, straight back to the rabbis and the teachers. At the same time, you don't want to carry that responsibility. That wouldn't be safe. And it could put you in that codependent situation that Fagi was referring to. So I think A would be, you know, that real empathy, you know, not the sympathy, not like, wow, that's really scary, you know, thanking them for telling you, and then giving them the first option of sharing on their own. And if that doesn't work, so then I do think, you know, that you're going to have to go into that difficult place of letting them know that you're going to have to share it forward. Did that answer your question?
Thank you for answering the question. And also,
Yes, thank you. Sorry, I was just writing it down.
It also reminds me also, Leah, as you were saying, is not to make promises like say, okay, if a student comes to you and says, I'm gonna tell you something, but you have to promise not to tell, okay? If you didn't listen to anything, listen now, okay? Because this is super important. If a student approaches you and says, I have to tell you something, but you have to promise not to tell, never promise. Never put yourself in that situation where you know that a person is in a dangerous situation, but you can't tell because you promised, okay? So never say, okay, I promise I won't tell ever. Don't ever say that. You can just say, I'm going to keep this a safe place for you. I want you to feel comfortable talking to me. But if you're in danger, I'm not going to be able to keep that a secret. Okay, so that's an important thing. And Leah, maybe you can suggest a better way of wording that. But it's important not to promise that I'll keep something a secret. If a student tells you that she's suicidal and she plans on killing herself tonight, that's not something you can keep a secret. So I don't know, Leah, if there's something you want to add to that, but a way to ensure safety without promising not to tell.
Okay. I can reflect from my experience of being a therapist in a clinic where you work as a team. So in Machon Dvir, we work together, we share information. And I let my clients know from the get-go, from the beginning, this is our private relationship, but not everything you say is going to stay in this room. And it's kind of scary for me to do and for them to hear, because that can be so uncomfortable. That could put a big wall right in the beginning in this very vulnerable place. They're just getting to know me. They're going to share some really difficult things. Who knows why they came, lots of different reasons, right? And the reason I do that is because I think that you're less likely to be in these kind of situations if from the beginning you let the girls know what your role is. And you make it very clear through how you communicate and very consistently that you're there, you're safe, you're fun, you're not a rabbi, you're not a teacher, but their safety is very, very important, and you're here to help them, and sometimes helping means sharing. So even letting them know that in the beginning is better. It's a risk, right? It feels kind of like, oh, but they're not going to like me, right? But you're more likely to get into situations that will leave you feeling very overwhelmed and carrying too much for a Madrichot to carry if you don't let them know that from the beginning. And I think the part that I'm saying about the consistency is something to keep in mind. If you give the message, some things I will tell, some things I won't, and they don't know exactly what that is, so that will put you in a difficult position. They'll be like, but how come you told this, and how come you don't tell that, right? So making it very clear what is our relationship is something that will really help you.
Thank you. Also, like, Leah mentioned, like, first of all, if it's an emergency, if this person is in active danger right now, girls get themselves into some crazy situations. If a girl comes into a dorm and she's like, there's this guy following me. He's been following me all day. Okay. Don't tell anyone. So tell, like, if there's an active dangerous situation, you've gotta take care of that. Whether that's calling your school authorities or whether it's calling the police if need be, but you have to take care of emergency situations. But if there's a situation where, let's say, I see that in Yael Sarah, so Yael Sarah's question of, let's say she tells me that she has an eating disorder or she's developing an eating disorder. So it's not like an immediate emergency. We're not afraid that something's gonna happen like this minute. So then what you would tell her is you'd want her to talk to someone. And if not, you want to go with her, like Leah said. But let's say she's like not into either of those options. You could like you can try to like question her, like what are you worried is going to happen? Would you consider talking to someone else in the school, even if not the principal? Like, be curious, like show her the shades of gray. Would you be willing to speak to a therapist, even if you don't talk to the principal, even if you don't talk to the teacher? Would you be willing to speak to so-and-so? So show her that it's not all or nothing, that it's not like, well, right now we have to go post this in the school, on the school bulletin board. Show her that there's a place for her to be able to get safety without it having to be all or nothing. Okay, were there any other questions that came up? Any other questions? Okay, so I would like you all to know that we are available both at Amudim and at Machon Dvir, available to take questions if you think of them later. There's going to be another session on, what are we today? It's Tuesday. On Sunday night, and we look forward to seeing you there. And on Sunday night, we're going to address some of the emergency situations and some of the, major mental health issues that you might run into, and really get into more detail of some of the things that you might be facing this year. We look forward to seeing you then. Okay, and if anyone wants to reach out, please reach out anytime. Amudim does not charge for their services. Our case management and referral is free, so it's free to call us. Okay, we will see you next week.